I'm Josh, and I moved to reInvent. So I wrote a blog article for this a little bit, so I'm just going to kind of use that as a template for this. It's been a really busy week. I can put together like a slideshow or like that. So please, if you have questions, interrupt me. Ask lots of questions because content. So that'd be good. reInvent, of course, is Amazon Web Services, yearly conference they have out in Vegas. And they usually take over like the Venetian Sands Expo area. This huge building out back of the Venetian. And this year they expanded out into a couple other hotels. Mostly they took most of the Mirages across the street, so they took most of that out as well. 2015, when I went out there, there were 19,000 people that attended reInvent. And I'd never seen so many people in one place. Like, just the halls were jam-packed full of people. This year, they had claimed to 32,000 people. And both years, it sold out. So it's just an absolutely huge event. Has anybody here ever been to reInvent before, out that way? What's the overall familiarity with AWS and web services? Just so I kind of know. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, good deal. Yeah, there you go. Okay, that works. That works. Yeah, Man in the High Castle, great show. So, let's see. Out there, usually there are the two keynote speakers. So Andy Jassy comes out usually the quote unquote first day, right? So Monday there's usually not too much going on. Everybody's still coming in and getting settled. Tuesday is kind of usually for like type things, like they do boot camps or sales demos, things of that sort there. And then on Wednesday morning, Andy Jassy usually comes in, and he is, I believe, the CEO of AWS. So this year was a little different. On Tuesday night, they had James Hamilton. James Hamilton is one of their distinguished engineers, as they put. He's VP and distinguished engineer, which I thought was an interesting job title. But and he just talked about a whole lot about their data center hardware and data center architecture, and that was really neat to hear some of the decisions that they've made, and talked about some of even the custom hardware that they developed, custom processors for their routers, and some of the choices about the networking architecture that they had, fiber backplanes, and stuff that was definitely beyond me in a lot of ways. So, but he was a trip. I enjoyed listening to him. Andy Jassy the next morning, of course, reInvent is all about like announcements. This is all the new stuff that's going on with AWS, what we're presenting or releasing. So he kind of started out. I'm just going to walk through some of these announcements. There's a lot of them. So he announced EC2 instances changes. The T series of instance, which is burstable computing, announced the T2 X large and 2X large, which host a bunch more RAM. I think it's 8 and 16 per. There's the EC2 R4 memory optimized instances, and just more performant, faster RAM for the money. i3 instances, higher I/O, essentially. It's a new class, so that's not bottlenecked on I/O. Custom IOPS has been configurable in AWS for a while, but these kind of specialize in it, so you can get some really, really excellent throughput to your disk system. So C5, which is a kind of a new class, it's like the next step of their compute instances. So they're talking about I believe it was all around the Intel Skylake chipsets, which are said to have excellent performance. It's just kind of the next generation of their compute focused hardware. Elastic GPUs, which is really interesting. The GPU instances have been, Azure offers them as well as AWS and a bunch of other cloud providers. If you need to do mathematically intensive calculations or whatever, then you've got, you can develop your systems around the CUDA cores available in GPUs. Now you can kind of attach GPUs to your instances like you do, EBS volumes. You can just say, hey, I need another GPU on this box and crunch more numbers. So that's a really interesting concept and kind of neat. Amazon Light Sale, which I didn't get into, but so much, but it's kind of streamlines essentially. I think for new up and comers, people that are unfamiliar with AWS coming on board, Azure has kind of really, I think, secured that market heavily, because you can kind of come in, press a couple buttons, and you have an instance. And with Amazon, when you go there, you need to know more than just be pressing a couple buttons to get started. And I think Light Sale was really introduced to help you manage that. That's just a really easy, quick way to get started with AWS. And of course, it scripts all the stuff you're doing. So later, when you become totally awesome with AWS, you can go in and pick apart all the things that Light Sale did for you, instead of just having it as a separate, isolated environment. And the last like EC2 type announcements was the F1 instances. And these are of particular interest to me. They allow assignable, I believe it's assignable, field programmable grid array hardware that you can attach to these instances. Now, FPGAs are special chips that pretty much don't include a base instruction set. You get to load them with an instruction set. So you can essentially program the processor to process the way that you need it to. So you can write a piece of software, push it to your processor, and then have hardware accelerated whatever it is that you're doing, which is a super, super cool concept and idea. So at any rate, and these keynotes are like, usually a few hours, 3 hours. We have guest speakers come up and all that stuff. So there's a couple mentions of guest speakers coming up and things of that sort. He eventually moved on to talking about big data and their AI stuff. So Amazon Athena is a system that allows you to just kind of dump your data into S3. Your Hadoop type data, things that you would find on a Hadoop file service. And then Amazon Athena allows you to essentially SQL query against a S3 bucket. Just as simple as it gets. You just put it out there, put your query in Athena, it runs against your data in S3, it's good to go. So it's kind of like, your whole classic Elastic MapReduce with Yarn or something of that sort, but they handle all the service for you. So that's kind of game changing. It was kind of just to get up and running with big data super fast. In the AI perspective, you've got all of the technologies that were around Amazon Alexa. They've started bringing those out as services. So Amazon Recognition was the first announcement, and that's pretty much an image recognition service. So you can give it pictures. I don't know if it'll do video. I don't believe so yet, but you can give it a series of pictures, tons of photo data, and it will recognize people in the photos as the same people or similar people. It will recognize different aspects of the photo. It can categorize your photos for you, and it can recognize facial expressions on people's faces, which is a little scary, but it's kind of neat technology. Like if you're doing that kind of image recognition stuff. Poly is a text-to-speech, speech-to-text engine. So it's speech recognition, I believe, as well as the reverse, being able to, different voices, essentially the Alexa voice, right? But it's, of course, the big part there is the being able to recognize human speech as accurately as Alexa does is now a service. So if you, want to spice up your phone tree or something of that sort, it would be an awesome way to do it. And then Amazon Lex is some of the core abilities of Alexa. It is how the processing happens, how the decision trees work is now available to you with Amazon Lex, which is kind of cool. So after that, he moved on to some just kind of cherry-picked small stuff. I guess he announced Postgres QL, Postgres. You guys familiar with Postgres DB? So, and that compatibility is now available for Amazon Aurora. And it's kind of interesting the way he described it. since Aurora was built as MySQL compatibility, you now have Postgres compatibility in there as well, and you can apparently just swap queries, whenever you feel like it, query it in, MySQL compatible, or do things more Postgres style. So it's kind of interesting. AWS Green Grass was one of the next announcements. It was kind of weird because he was changing gears a little strangely at that point. He went to Green Grass, which is essentially a mobile framework for supporting Lambda functions on mobile devices, so disconnected devices. You guys familiar with Lambda? By and large, Lambda is a methodology that AWS has for allowing you to essentially run serverless. You can put your code in Lambda, and given particular conditions in your environment or timing, or just clicking a button to trigger it, it will run a particular set of functions that perform particular duties. For instance, in a lot of the AWS environments that I set up here at EPON, I have a couple Lambda scripts to save a couple bucks. At 5 p.m. it shuts down all the machines in the instance. Like, we don't have to pay for them running overnight. And of course, in the morning brings them back up. Very common use of Lambda. And of course, there's a number of other uses. AWS Green Grass promises to bring this type of technology to the mobile device. And I was like, that's kind of cool. And I started thinking about ways, that you might want to use that. While doing so, he goes on to talk about the Snowball. The AWS Snowball was a device announced last year when I was there as well. That it's essentially a PC. It's like a tough book, but a desktop. It's like super padded, impact resistant, and it comes with a massive amount of storage. And what this allows you to do is you slap in your data center, and you load it up with all kinds, whatever data that you need to get into the cloud. You just load up, terabytes. I can't remember the sizes on it. I didn't write the sizes down, but of the old device, and then you ship it off to AWS. They put it in their data center. It becomes part of S3 or whatever availability that they have there. So trying to get data into the cloud over your standard internet connection can be take, in some cases, years if you have a big enough SAN. And this, of course, cuts that time way down. There's an old MIT adage, I think it was, nothing has bandwidth like a station wagon full of tapes. So, but in expounding upon that, Jassy was like, he was super shocked as to how popular the Snowball was. Like, he thought they'd originally ordered too many. He was getting ticked at his guys because, they had all these snowballs that were just going to be sitting around. They were all shipped out like the first week, every last one of them. And so he had no idea it was going to be this popular. So they they created this Snowball Edge, which comes with more storage, has a lot faster CPU and things of that sort on it, and includes, this is why he announced Green Grass, it includes Green Grass. So you can take a bunch of Lambda functions that are specific to your data and be able to manipulate and mangle your data as it gets copied to the Snowball, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it could be special use cases, but there could be things like event triggers and things that you want to happen at certain amounts of certain times, or how full your Snowball Edge may be, something of that sort. So it was kind of an interesting concept. Pretty good. And then after talking a lot about the Edge, he goes on to talk about there are huge customers, Fortune 500 companies that have petabytes, sometimes even exabytes of data that they would be interested in getting in the cloud. I'm like, these people are, that's a lot of data. They then go up and pull the sheath off of this thing called the Snowmobile. And it's literally a tractor trailer. The trailer portion of which is a data center that is entirely closed. You can't open it. You can't get into it. It is a big box on wheels. And roll it up to your data center. You plug in power and you plug in some fiber. Let's just start loading it up with your data. They'll drive it away when you're done. Put it in the cloud. It's crazy, right? But apparently it's popular enough. They're doing a whole bunch of them. So I don't know how many SSDs are in that thing, but it's got to be. That's going to be one of the most expensive wrecks on the interstate when somebody runs into one of them. So, But anyway, the following day, the next morning, Warner Vogels usually comes out to give his keynote presentation and a bunch of other announcements. So Warner, I believe, is more focused on, he's like the CTO of AWS. And some basic offerings. First, there's OpsWorks for Chef Automate. Chef Automate is apparently a new version of Chef that kind of does a little bit more enterprise nature to Chef, and OpsWorks is now supporting and including that. And there is now Amazon EC2 Systems Manager, and that is one of my main pain points is having to maintain patches and things of that sort on your instances. Once you get your instance out there, it's like you build it up and everything's good. You don't need to do too much to it, but all the time, of course, it's falling behind in security updates and new packages and things of that sort. Systems Manager is a way to automate the process of managing all of your instances, keeping them patched and up to date and fresh, essentially. So then talking more developer-centric stuff, Amazon has released in the past like Code Pipeline and what is the other one? Code Deploy as parts of their CI/CD pipeline, essentially. And along with that, this time they announced AWS Code Build, which is, of course, a build system. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jenkins, so that would be essentially an analog for that out there. So now they have a full suite. You can run your entire CI/CD pipeline. It's pretty cool. I haven't played with any of them. I need to, but it looks very neat. So another thing that was really interesting, and I have yet to see how it's going to work out, was AWS XRay that they mentioned, and it is essentially it appeared to me to be an infrastructure debugger. It looked very similar to like App Dynamics. I don't know if anybody's familiar with App Dynamics. You used App Dynamics. It's in the past, it was it's caused me a little bit of frustration from time to time. But this looked really neat, and it looked essentially fairly agentless, since they have all kinds of stuff on these instances anyway. It was able to grasp and understand the type of traffic that was going back and forth between your instances and the relationships that they had to one another. So it could kind of give you a decent amount of debugging information about what was happening with your AC being used. So beyond that, he started talking a little bit towards security. AWS Shield was announced, and Shield is a new thing. We had that earlier this year. We had that huge DDoS attack on Dyn, and that apparently raised a number of eyebrows about the still remaining vulnerabilities in the internet. So them announcing AWS Shield was kind of timely in that it is a aggregate service across all of AWS. It's on by default that attempts to, across their endpoints, determine DDoS attacks and shut them down at border gateways, essentially border routers. So very, very cool service. Very cool reason to go with AWS, because I don't think anybody else has decent competition for that at this point yet. So it's kind of neat. And if that's not really enough, there's AWS Shield Advanced, which is a pay service on top of that allows you to have paid Amazon consultants essentially, analyze your services for vulnerabilities or things of that sort, as well as a support infrastructure if something were to happen, an attack is affecting your service. You say, hey guys, something's wrong. Come check my stuff out. So it's kind of a little bit of a backup, helps you sleep at night. So another interesting thing was Amazon Pinpoint, he went on to mention. And it is, Amazon Pinpoint's based around location data for mobile users. So like, everybody, all these mobile sites are like, want to know your location. So, and this helps to aggregate all that information. If you actually are using location-based information, you can aggregate management via Amazon Pinpoint. Which is kind of interesting. I haven't done enough mobile stuff to see its impact, but that could be really interesting. Then he went on this really interesting layout of the Amazon's big data offering and the components and the steps that you go through when you're setting up a big data infrastructure, because there's so many moving parts and there's so many components and potential implementations. So you can use different pieces of software at almost any step of the line, because there's always big parts of competition there. So and check out the article. I would show you this. It's just a tiny little image, but I wish I could blow that up. But check out the article and you can see it's got pretty much this whole thing laid out. And he then went on to point out all the missing pieces. Like, these are the things that you need to go and spin up an EC2 instance to do. These are the pain points for people trying to do quick big data in AWS, because you have to take time for ops and to build these things right. So he announced AWS Blue, which is an interesting name. It's a set, it's a whole, like an entire set of components that help you stitch together all of the existing big data services, as well as provide some of the connectors that weren't necessarily there before. So that's really interesting. He gave a quick demonstration of how it rounds out the entire platform as a service big data offering from AWS. So that's pretty cool. So he went on to talk about something slightly different, and this is something I'm not seeing AWS do before. I'm not sure if they actually have done it, but it was kind of new. In talking about containers and container management and container orchestration, there are of course, a lot of options available there. A lot of different ways to do these things: Kubernetes, Mesos, Straight, Docker, Docker Compose. In moving towards making that more of a service type situation, there are a number of hurdles to overcome. And instead of spinning up services and offering like base Docker containers to build your applications around and things of that sort, they offered what is called AWS Blocks, BLOX. And Blocks is not a service. It's a project on GitHub. It's open source. It's a large series of open source projects, apparently, that are the parts and components to help you do just that in container management and orchestration. So, and again, I need to play with that and see how well that works. It sounds really neat. So, and another thing is, I went on to mention, when I was talking about Lambda before, just run a function. C# support now in Lambda. So last year they announced Python support, which I was super overjoyed with. That was amazing because I'm a Python guy way back. But C# support. So now you can just take your C# function, drop it in Lambda, have it execute on a timed or triggered basis. Let's see, Lambda at Edge. This was an interesting thing. So when you have a web presentation within AWS, you have some kind of web application. You want to take the most advantage of the bandwidth and your processing time. So they offer right off the bat, CloudFront is a CDN service. It's content delivery network. So you can say, hey, I've got X amount of static content in my site. Pretty much your images directly, right? Your images, your JavaScript, your CSS, just so long as your JavaScript isn't dynamic. And you can take all this stuff and shove it into CloudFront and then put that in front of your dynamic application. CloudFront handles serving all of the stuff that it's just going to have to serve over and over. It's really simple stuff. Whereas it will shell out to your back-end system to say, hey, give me the dynamic content for putting this whole thing together. And one of Lambda at Edge is the ability to have Lambda execute from CloudFront directly. So for simple dynamic content, you no longer have to go to your backend. That's a step towards serverless web presence in that way. So that was really interesting. That was one thing that was super hot this year. When you just kind of walk around the halls and talk to people like outside of sessions or before sessions. It's the things that were really a buzz, serverless. I guess it was earlier this year that Amazon announced the ALB, which is the application load balancer. So they've had the ELB, which is the elastic load balancer, for a while. Which, strangely enough, they're now calling classic load balancer, but whatever. The ALB is the ability to assign routes to specific things. So I can have, my website something, go to my EC2 instance, and my website / something else, kick off a Lambda function, or any number of things. This one goes to S3, that guy needs to be served by CloudFront, however I want to do it. Given this, you could put together essentially serverless solutions this way, and this was what most of the buzz was about. You set up your ALB, break out all your routes as essentially even for an API. This is very doable, and each one of those endpoints calls a different Lambda function. Those Lambda functions have the ability to connect to like DynamoDB or Aurora on the back end for any kind of data retrieval or manipulation, and you put together your response in Lambda, send it back through the ALB. You have a functioning API with no computer. There's no computer to manage, no operating system to manage. It's all just bits, parts that are floating in the cloud. So that's really cool. The second hottest thing out there was IoT, which is kind of strangely like I've been an electronics geek for at least a little while now, and I kind of wanted to get away from coding and being in front of a monitor, so I break out my soldering iron as a kind of a hobby, right? And it's really interesting because a few years later, like IoT starts getting really big, and all these computer guys have soldering irons trying to make little devices to watch manufacturing processes and all these different aspects. So IoT was really hot. There were a number of vendors there advertising super capable, extremely small, low power use processors, things of that sort. So Expressive was one of my favorites there. They make the ESP8266, which is a small chip that has the ability to do Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and it's got enough memory to run a web server. You can do some dynamic content on it, and the entire card with the antenna and everything included is literally that big. I should have brought one. I should have thought about it, but because I've got like 10 of them at home. So it's literally that big, and you can put a battery on this thing, put a magnet on it, slap it up against a wall. It's a Wi-Fi AP that you can connect to from your computer or cell phone and play a little web game to do any little thing. In more reasonable applications, instead of just having fun, you can actually put wire temperature sensors to these things, or RPM gauges, or any kind of thing to put along your manufacturing process to monitor for different types of behavior can denote equipment failure. So that is essentially the world of IoT. Of course, there's medical applications and all kinds of different applications for it. Vehicles that benefit from all kinds of different devices that are connected. So IoT was again just super hot this year. So being out there is really neat. It's always when I get out there, it's like just a million miles an hour the whole time. It never really stops. It's super fast. Everybody's running around all over the place. And there were so many people this year. We got really jammed up a couple times in the hallways. Like a lot of the sessions end right around the same time. And that's another thing. You guys may not be familiar with reInvent. It's not just a conference with a vendor floor, and you go and walk around a vendor floor and look at things that people are selling. Along with this, they break out sessions, and a large number of sessions. So they have sessions that are presented by Amazon. They have sessions that are presented by some of AWS customers, and everybody kind of goes into they're on very specific topics, or introductory classes, or deep dives into architecture. And as you kind of build your schedule online, like I want to attend this and that and this, and visit these, watch these presentations. They're usually about an hour to an hour and a half a piece. And they try to get them all out right around the same time or within minutes of each other, because that way people can attend their next session, or people can swap tracks and go to different sessions. So it's a really neat conference that way. But this year there were so many people, the hallways got jammed up so bad a couple of times that nobody could move. We were all shoulder to shoulder. It was a little freaky because there's like thousands of people. That's when I started yelling, "Swimming green is people," and then only the gray-haired people laugh, and I was sad. But it's a really neat experience, and everybody's just moving constantly all the time. On Thursday night, they always do. Wait a minute, it's Wednesday. They always do just this huge party, which is the replay party, and they always have, like, I think in 2014, I believe they had Skrillex there, and last year they had Zed there, which is an awesome show. And this year they had Martin Garrix, who's a Dutch DJ, and it was just a killer show. Um, so he's playing like most of the time. I think he has a couple of DJs lined up before him, but he's got like the back half. This year they had these two huge tents outside, and he's got like the back half of one of these tents with all kinds of pyrotechnics and visual displays, laser shows. They had this cool ceiling that dropped while you're on the dance floor, so they could do all this neat stuff. But there's all kinds of other stuff. Both sides of both of these tents are just lined back and forth with food. The open bar, games everywhere, like just stacks and stacks of old stand-up arcade games like Pac-Man. Even newer stuff. Like I had some Street Fighter stuff. So it's a super cool party, and everybody goes to that. It's packed front to back, but it's a good time. So this year, what I kind of got out of my experience there is last year I found it really interesting that the deep dives were super awesome. They were really deep. The guys would get 3 slides into their presentation, open up a terminal, and then the rest of their presentation was literally command line interfacing their way through a particular operation, things of that sort. I was a little disappointed to see that this year there was a little bit less of that. There was a lot more top-down, 5,000-foot view type situations, and I actually kind of wrote about that. I was like, I really kind of want you guys to get back to like getting in the dirt, get down in the ditches, and really do this stuff like live demos, stuff like that is really kind of cool. But there was a little bit of that as well. So I attended a couple sessions where the guys just terminal monkeys went through the whole process, whatever live demo, which is really good. So it was a really good time. I think it was excellent. I really enjoy being out there. I meet lots of great people. Everybody's super friendly too. That's out there. Everybody's like, hey, let's catch dinner or something like that. So I was standing in line at one of the little, restaurants outside of a casino, and there was like these guys in front of me. I think it was 4 people in front of me that were all waiting for 1-seat tables, and like one of the guys in the middle was like, we could probably get a table if you guys want to sit together. I was like, well, sure, yeah, definitely, this is great. And we had a conversation over dinner. Like all 4 of us ended up getting a table, or all 5 of us ended up getting a table, and sat and chatted for dinner. So it was kind of, everybody's really cool, and there's always something to talk with somebody about. So, and that's, I think, pretty much my experience out at reInvent. You guys, the blog entry out here has a bunch of great links. Okay, there's tons of course, AWS has their YouTube channel. Okay, so they've got all of the keynote presentations out there. If you're interested in this stuff, go watch the keynotes. They're great. There's I have a list recap of the announcements, and there are the breakout sessions. A whole bunch of the breakout sessions, maybe even all of them this year, I was really shocked, are available not only on SlideShare, but someone has taken the time to build a GitHub repository of a lot of the actual videos of all of these breakout sessions. And there's at least a couple hundred. There's really is a lot of them. So any session that you saw from reInvent 2016 that you wanted to dig into, if you found a catalog or have a catalog somewhere, I think the catalogs are out there too, you can find in this GitHub repo. It's really super awesome resource. I was very happy to find it. So, and that's pretty much it. Questions? Everything. Anybody?
What was the name of the IoT chips again?
So, it's this company, Expressive, Expressive, excuse me. And they do the ESP8266. So their latest chip is the ESP32, which is much easier to remember. And the ESP32 is, I think they're so incredibly priced. Like the 8266s, when I was getting those, they were $2 a piece. Like now they were shipped from China that way, so. But you wait a month for them, but they're cheap, and they're really neat. And the 32s, I think they're looking they're going to be $5 a piece. So yeah, it's really cool. And it's Bluetooth 4.0, 5 gigabit, 5 gigahertz, Wi-Fi. The faster processor. I can't remember the RAM on it. It's not like gigs, it's a couple megs or something, but it's more than enough to do very, very basic stuff, and get it sent wherever. The fact that you have that level of connectivity means that you can get whatever data that you need off device. You don't need to have that storage necessarily. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
I have two questions.
Sure.
First one is
Oh,
the
sorry.
second one is, so when you think of serverless, because it's a big trend, what are the consequences of serverless? Why it's
So the question was, what are the consequences of serverless, and some of the potential pitfalls. So that I'm not sure, honestly, serverless has been explored enough for that to be answered adequately yet. To the best of my knowledge, there aren't that many people that are like going full serverless for a lot of things. Usually these days it's for very simple APIs, from what I've seen. So I know some of the things that are present as acknowledgeable pitfalls are your ALB. I know the ELB did. The ALB, I believe, has a spin up time. And essentially that means like when you start throwing traffic at it, if you throw, 10,000 connections a second at it from 0, it's going to choke. It is not going to have a good time. It's going to kill 99% of your requests for the next 2 minutes while it gathers the resources to be able to answer that many requests. Okay, so you have to watch how your traffic moves. If you have huge swings in your traffic, one of the techniques we've seen for ELBs is to warm up the stack, where you just have like something like Apache Bench or some kind of either benchmarking or stress test utility, and you just jam it with all kinds of connections for a second, get it going, get it warmed up. So they'll attribute a whole bunch of resources to it then, and then turn the traffic onto it, and it'll spin up. Some of the other things are, that same thing is true for Lambda on the back end. So you could be double hit as well. If you have a lot of traffic going to a particular route that's hitting one of those particular Lambda functions repeatedly, it may help to also warm that up. So you might not necessarily be able to hit just one endpoint if you're trying to keep your stack warm. But for the purposes of just general use API that's getting 15 to 150 requests a minute or something like that, that's perfectly suitable, I think. So the only other thing that I can think of as a potential pitfall that's curious to me is management. Once you have an API that grows to a certain size, I imagine, because these things end up being different components, you've got, Lambda functions for essentially each route. Well, I think you can wrap that up too. It depends on how you address it. But if you have something like Lambda functions for each route, you could have a ton of Lambda functions. And keeping those managed, especially when you're running multiple APIs, it's like, so I think you have to be careful about your naming scheme. Essentially, as you're like putting these things and naming them, be very careful as to name them appropriately for the version that you're working on and for the name of the API that you're working on. And then we keep management to a reasonable level, I think. So any other questions? Olivia, I know you got a question.
No? I have a question. I was just going to look it out and
Sure.
so how do you see the competition shape up? Because it's fierce with Google Cloud and Azure. How do you see it play out?
So with really, Amazon is, they've been the leader. They were first on the block, right? And the question was, how do I see the competition playing out? So between the different cloud providers. So AWS was the first on the block, and they got out there ahead really of everybody. Everybody was kind of taken by surprise. So Google was like, oh man, we got to get on board with this, and so was Microsoft. A few years later, they started to have offerings for this stuff. But since then, really, Amazon gathered so much attention so quickly, got so many customers so quickly, got the revenue spun up. They were able to put the money into R&D and figure out what their customers needed. And one thing that was stressed throughout the keynotes just continuously was, the fact that they listen to their customers. They're like, we would totally tell you what we're going to do next year, but we have no idea because we're going to ask you guys, and you're going to tell us what we're going to do next year. And I was like, hey, that's just an awesome business model. It's really cool. So just ultimately very responsive. And I honestly don't see anybody else doing that. They are out there being the thought leader. And the entire time, really, Microsoft and actually, honestly, a lesser extent, Google are playing catch up. They don't really have to ask their customers because all they need to do is look at what AWS is doing and do that, which is exactly what Azure has been doing. They've been mashing them almost lockstep, on a pretty much a 2-year back run on that. They're 2 years. If Amazon has it today, 2 years from now, Azure is going to get it. So it's that kind of thing. Yeah, really, for my money and just usability, automation, new technology, the cutting edge technology, AWS is so far ahead of everybody else. It's kind of scary actually. It's a little freaky that they're the only guys that are capable of doing some of this stuff. Yeah. Aaron, you got something now? See, I had to put you guys on the spot. Yeah.
So Amazon, you mentioned, instead of an open source,
Yeah, sure.
do you think Amazon's gonna, because of their market, their concern, making open source projects less attractive? Services that they're offering that are more enterprise, more robust.
To be honest, I think that's probably already happening to some extent. That's, I'm a long-time open source lover. I've done everything open source and always tried to tend towards open source for a solution if I can. With that, it's an interesting dichotomy because it's so nice to not have to worry about managing that instance that Jenkins is running on. Man, is it running out of space? Do I need volume? Do I need to migrate this thing? Do I need to patch the system? When I can just have a service that costs X. So yeah, I think they are in some ways definitely competing directly with open source offerings with their services. But it's very nice also to see that they do support open source where it makes sense for them. So like the announcement of Blocks, I thought that was super cool. It's like, hey, you could do. We realize you could do this stuff. You could do container management like 50 billion ways. There's just all kinds of ways to do it. If we made services to support all this stuff, we'd never have time to do anything else. So we're going to make just the tools, and you get to use them however you want, and we'll just put them out there. So that was a very nice. It was a very interesting compromise between the two ways. And as soon as more conventional, best practices and stuff emerge, I think around those technologies, you'll probably see developing services around common best practices and common follow-throughs. Anything else?
All right, well, if there's no more questions, thank you so much, Josh, for speaking. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. Feel free to stick around and network some, grab a slice of pizza for the road. We hope to see you at our next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, you're fine.